A few years back, when I was in cosmetology school, our class took a field trip to a major beauty expo in a large city about 2 hours away. The show featured demos of the latest techniques in hair and nails, allowing us to watch skilled experts share their talents. To save on costs, we divided into small groups for hotel rooms, so I ended up sharing a room with 3 other girls. Once we checked in and unpacked, we were all excited. It felt like a fun sleepover before the big show the next day. To celebrate, we decided to go out for some snacks and drinks, and we wandered around the city, laughing and chatting, before settling at a cozy spot to eat and unwind. We returned to the hotel about an hour later, and although it was already late and a couple of the girls were a little tipsy, we headed up to our room quietly. I hadn't had anything to drink since I wasn't yet 21 and couldn't order from the bar. As we were just hanging out and discussing our plans for the next day, the phone in our hotel room suddenly rang around 11 p.m. It took us by surprise. Hotel phones rarely ring that late. We all exchanged confused looks, and I picked up the receiver and said hello. Since this was a few years ago, I can't recall every detail, but here's what I remember. A man on the other end told us we hadn't paid for our room and that one of us needed to come down to the lobby immediately to settle the bill. We were baffled because we had definitely paid. We'd all chipped in and given the money to Molly, and I even saw her pay when we checked in. Besides, the hotel wouldn't have handed over the room keys if we hadn't settled up. The call seemed strange and unprofessional, especially at that late hour. I told the man we were certain the room was paid for and offered to address any issues in the morning, but he insisted someone had to come down right away, or we couldn't stay. His persistence and raised voice made me uneasy. I'm usually a bit cautious, so I wasn't about to let any of us go down to the lobby in the middle of the night. I firmly stated that if there was a real issue, they could come to our room. He grew more agitated and insisted again that one of us come down, even hinting at consequences, though he didn't say what they might be. My classmates looked at me questioningly as I hung up, and I explained what happened and shared my uneasy feeling about the call. They agreed that the whole situation seemed off and that it was odd for the front desk to call so late. Nothing happened after that, and no one came to the room. The following morning, as we checked out, we asked the front desk if there was any issue with our payment or if they'd called us the previous night. The staff had no record of the call and assured us that they wouldn't have contacted guests so late. We all exchanged nervous glances and quickly left, unsettled by the experience. Afterward, I mostly forgot about it since nothing ultimately happened, and we didn't get kicked out. But looking back, it really does feel creepy. Who made that call, and why would they want one of us to come down to the lobby alone at night? It still gives me chills. In the summer of 1999, I was spending my break with my mom in a quiet little town in New Mexico. The days were scorching, and at night, the only sounds were crickets. I was 12, full of attitude, always thinking I was older than I was. I quickly became friends with a few girls who lived down the street, and we spent the whole summer together, 4 of us thinking we were wise beyond our years. There was Nikki, Katie, Julie, and me. We were part of that last group of kids who used landlines, stayed outside until dark on trampolines, and had sleepovers where we watched movies on VHS and listened to music on our Walkmans. Back then, it was normal to walk around town at night, and we rarely locked our doors. We didn't have cell phones or the internet. Behind my mom's house was a large concrete wall, a gate, and then an open stretch of desert that seemed endless, covered in dry dirt, cacti, and small bushes, with faint mountains in the distance. Our small town had a busy railroad running right through it, and the main street was lined with gas stations, diners, motels, and a few tourist spots. Everyone knew each other, and life was simple, though our parents always warned us to stay out of the desert, avoid the train tracks, and not walk along Main Street at night. But, of course, we didn't listen. Julie, Nikki, and I would spend our days exploring the desert, wandering past cacti, and crossing the train tracks, watching trains pass. We'd walk down Main Street, past gas stations and stores, to get to Katie's house. It all felt like a big adventure, and we never thought much about the dangers we were supposed to avoid. Sometimes, we'd stay out until dark, or we'd go back to my place to jump on the trampoline. On one particular weekend, we planned a stay at Katie's house while her parents were out of town. The first night, the girls were jumping off a spiral staircase onto a giant beanbag. I didn't join in because I was scared of heights. Later, we set up for a sleepover and watched The Exorcist with Linda Blair. I was so scared I barely slept. On the second night, we told our parents Katie's mom would take us to the movies, but we left out the detail that her parents weren't actually in town. We each got some cash, then walked down Main Street to grab snacks at the little store, as we called it. We were far from cautious and didn't notice a man trailing us all the way back. It's worth mentioning that Katie's family was well off, and their property was large, with a few buildings and old cars her dad was fixing up. Inside, the house had a big open area with the kitchen, dining, and living spaces all in one, lined with windows. There were 2 doors, one at the front and one in the back. We returned safely and made pizza in the oven. At some point, one of the girls turned on the news while we ate, and we caught a quick report about a suspicious man on Main Street, but we didn't think much of it. Later, something upset Julie, and she stormed outside. I followed her, and we sat on a bench while she vented about the other girls. Suddenly, a tense feeling filled the air, and we both felt it. I quietly asked if she thought we were being watched, and she gave a small nod. Just then, bright headlights flooded over us. A car was parked in the driveway, with its lights shining directly on us. My heart was racing as I stood up and pulled Julie away from the spot where she seemed frozen in place. As we started to run back inside, the man made this eerie, high-pitched squeal that morphed into a growl. Despite my fear, I rushed Julie and me back inside. As soon as we were in, the headlights went off, plunging us into darkness. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and joined the others. By then, Julie had calmed enough to explain what had happened, while I checked the back door and made sure all the lights were out. We stood still, listening by the back door, and I heard a car door close outside. I prayed he would leave, but then, right beside my face, the door handle started to turn, first slowly, then faster. I backed away, crawling to the others, and for the next 2 or 3 hours, we stayed completely silent as he banged on windows and doors, trying to get in. The phone was across the room, right next to 2 large windows, but I finally mustered the courage to run over and call my mom, explaining we were alone and that someone was trying to break in. After I hung up, Julie shouted out to the man that we'd called the police, and then, suddenly, the banging stopped. We heard him get into his car, followed by that chilling squeal-turn-growl as he drove away. My mom and stepdad arrived soon after and searched the entire place. The scariest part was the scratch marks covering the doors and windows. Katie ended up spending the rest of the weekend at Nikki's house, and she had a crazy story to tell her parents when they got home. Our parents didn't even punish us for lying and sneaking around. 2 hours of terror from a madman seemed like punishment enough. Around a decade ago, when I was 15, my aunt, my best friend Lynn, and I decided to have an impromptu sleepover. We were hanging out at my nan's house, cozied up in the living room with blankets, watching movies, and snacking on pizza and chips. By 11 p.m., we were having so much fun that we decided to stay the night instead of heading home. We didn't bother with sleeping bags or separate beds. Instead, we all piled into my Aunt Jo's double bed, deciding to sleep top and tail, some of us with our heads at one end and others with our feet. After gossiping and goofing around like typical teenage girls, we finally tried to settle down around 1 a.m., switching off the lights and getting into bed. But even then, we didn't sleep right away. We kept laughing and joking in the dark, playfully tugging the blanket back and forth. Joe's room was upstairs on the first floor, second floor by US standards, with the bed positioned against the wall that had a window right above it. I was at that end, so my head was near the wall, while Joe and Lynn were sleeping with their heads toward the window. As I was beginning to drift off, I noticed a strange sound, like something lightly scraping against the outside wall. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to keep me alert. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just the wind or maybe a tree branch. But the sound kept going, preventing me from fully falling asleep. Then, all of a sudden, Joe let out a terrified scream. She jumped up from the bed, yelling, "Get away from the window." Her voice was filled with panic, and then Lynn screamed too. My heart started pounding as I turned to see what was happening. That's when I saw it, the shadow of a person, arms raised, standing right outside the window. We all bolted out of the room, screaming for my Nan. She rushed out from the living room, shocked to see us so terrified. Joe was already in tears, and Lynn and I were in a state of shock as we tried to explain what had just happened. Once we managed to tell her, my Nan immediately called the police and grabbed a bat. She went upstairs to check, but by then, the person had disappeared. When the police arrived, they took our statements and looked around the area but didn't find anything. They gave us a number to call if anything unusual happened again or if the person returned. That night, we were too scared to go back to Joe's room, so we decided to sleep downstairs instead. We were shaken up, but Joe was especially upset as she explained that the person must have climbed up to the roof and tried to open her window. The raised arms made sense once Joe mentioned that her window could open from both the top and bottom, and she usually opened it from the top. It seemed like this person had been watching the house for a while and decided that night was the perfect chance to break in. Looking back, we realized how lucky we were to be having a sleepover that night, otherwise, Joe might have been lying with her back to the window, unaware of the shadow outside. It was a chilling reminder of how close we came to something far worse. About a week after my friend moved into her new apartment post-college, I planned to stay over since we were heading to a mutual friend's birthday party and it would be too late for me to head home afterward. Her apartment wasn't fully set up yet, as she was still in the process of moving in. When I arrived, I mentioned feeling a bit of strange energy in the space, but I brushed it off as we enjoyed the evening, laughing and unwinding before bed. Around 2 a.m., we finally settled down to sleep in her queen-sized bed. At about 2:30 a.m., I jolted awake to her shouting right beside me. She apologized, saying she'd been startled. She wasn't used to sharing a bed after living alone in dorms for so long. I reassured her, still half asleep, and we both turned over and went back to sleep. I frequently have vivid, sometimes eerie dreams, likely due to my medication, and that night was no exception. I dreamt of a creepy clown slowly peeking out from her closet. The room in my dream looked exactly like her real bedroom, making the experience unsettlingly real. Oddly enough, my friend woke up later in the night, mumbling about a dream where she, too, saw a clown or some dark figure calling her to the closet. She said she felt scared and refused to go near it. Half asleep, I didn't think much of it at the time and dozed back off. Around 5 a.m., as the room started to lighten a bit, I woke up and thought I saw a small figure in a blue shirt quickly leave her bathroom. I was groggy and couldn't quite register what I'd seen, assuming it was one of her roommates and fell back asleep. When we both woke up fully around 8:30 or 9 o'clock, I teased her about talking in her sleep. She then mentioned she'd had a disturbing dream about a clown, describing exactly what I'd seen in my own dream. At this point, I felt a bit unnerved, thinking maybe her mentioning the dream had influenced mine. She got up to brush her teeth, only to find both bathroom doors, the one to the hallway and the one to the bedroom, wide open. She was sure she'd closed them the night before. I casually suggested it might have been her roommate who used the bathroom, but she reminded me that her roommates hadn't moved in yet, they weren't arriving until September. Now we were both feeling a bit freaked out. She checked the patio door and found it unlocked and partially open, though she was careful to lock it each day. Since there were no security cameras, and with nothing missing, we wondered if perhaps a homeless person had slipped in. However, everything in the kitchen was untouched, adding to the mystery. The entire experience left us both feeling deeply unsettled. Two years ago, my best friend and I had a bizarre experience that still puzzles us to this day. We've talked it over many times, but we can't come up with any explanation that fits. Here's what happened. We went on a winter hiking and running trip in the mountains with two other close friends. The weather was rough, with a lot of snow and ice, and the main parking lot at the trailhead was closed for road repairs, so we had to park a few miles away on a long, deserted road. It seemed like we were the only ones in the park that day. We often take outdoor trips like this together, and my best friend and I usually go ahead of the other two since we're a bit faster. This day was no different, and after finishing our part of the trail early, we jogged back to the car to wait for our friends. On the way, we passed an old cemetery by the road. On a whim, I turned off the road, laughing, and pulled my friend with me to explore it briefly before continuing on. From where we stood, we could even see our car parked down the road. We eventually reached the car and began waiting, glancing back every so often to check for our friends. After about 30 minutes with no sign of them, we spotted two figures running toward us in the distance. I pointed and said, "There they are." My friend noticed they were moving unusually fast, but as they got closer, we realized they weren't our friends at all. It was a man and a woman, but strangely, they were dressed exactly like us. The woman had long blonde hair just like mine, and both were wearing hats similar to ours. As they came nearer, I said, "Wait, that's not them." We both fell silent, feeling a chill as the two runners suddenly veered off the road toward the cemetery. The woman playfully pulled the man, laughing, exactly as I had done with my friend earlier. Then, just like that, they vanished. My friend and I looked at each other, feeling shaken, and almost at the same time, we said, "That was us." It felt undeniable, and the experience left us both rattled. A few minutes later, our friends appeared, walking down the road toward the car. We immediately asked if they'd seen anyone else on the trail, but they hadn't encountered anyone. To this day, we haven't been able to find a logical explanation, and we still bring it up, wondering what on earth could have caused such an eerie, unexplainable encounter.